And we are live. And we are back in session, and we're really getting caught between the Alexander Twilight portrait unveiling in the hall and trying to get bills out. Trini, I think yesterday we heard at the end of the day that if we do nothing, the Agency of Transportation, who owns the airports, can just put the mitigation fees in their budget. But there were other questions about airports and what, expansion and prime ag and how many of them are on prime ag. There's Michael. And just wondered what you could tell us. And Senator Hardy, I know you had questions about airports and.
Well, I have questions. I also have information because I've been following this issue really closely, and I've spoken to the Agency of Transportation about the permitting process and the development at airports. And this is unfortunately one of the side effects of that, them trying to get out of land use regulations. The Franklin County Airport is not the only airport that's going through permitting and development. All of them are. I'm very concerned about this as being a slippery slope. And so those are my concerns with the bill. I don't necessarily have questions. I have talked at length to so I don't know if Trini will have any different.
Trini, can you fill us in what normally happens? I remember the Knapp Airport put in a whole runway, but I never saw a request come through here to exempt them from anything. Are each one of these just different, and whether or not they come in here to ask for an exemption, or is it just one or two that are looking at prime ag? What can you fill us in on, if anything?
All right, so this conversation actually started not because of projects the Agency of Transportation was doing, but because of some interest by some private developers who needed access to a runway to locate at a state airport. So you have seen the Knapp project come through. In Franklin, we have a runway reconstruction and widening, as well as an expansion and a parallel taxiway project. Those usually come in around the 3 to 4 acre impact, with the fees being in the 20 to 25,000 range. So we can build them into our projects. We get a limited amount of funding, but the fees are eligible, so we work them into the budget of the project and whatnot. Where the rub was coming, we have a couple of folks that we're talking to right now about some sizable development at some of these airports. The one in Franklin County is expected to be in the 40 to 45 acre size. It's 3 different businesses that are looking at building together in that location. And then you're looking at a fee that's in the $270,000 range. And you got the engineering and prep and whatnot. So those values became sizable. And when we were looking at what can we do to help them in this, when we got into airports back in the 20s, when they built the airports, it was, the Highgate one was the training ground for pilots for the World War. The state acquired them in the 60s because the municipalities, realized they weren't money makers. The capacity to pay for them and keep them open was limited. So they came to the state, and the FAA kind of was lenient for quite a few years and would allow us to use some of the fields that were away from the runways, not needed for development, for ag use. We had, I think, 3 airports that we had leases on for, they could hay them. They couldn't do just anything they wanted to. They had to be cut by certain times at certain heights. But now they've come down and said no to any of it. So the take that we had on it was, these airports are a defined landmass. They're between 100 and 300 acres. I think we've got one over that one's 380. And they've already been taken out of ag use by regulation. So, you know, if we have a developer coming in there, why make them, the question we had was why make them pay mitigating prime ag soils if we've already said these are not for agriculture use? Seemed like a common sense approach to it to us. So that's what got the discussion started about, should we be exempting development on these well-defined parcels of land where regulation has already said we can't have it for use for ag. So it, you know, that's where the conversation started on all this. It became clear that it probably wasn't going to make it through for all the airports. And that's when it made the twist to just having Highgate in it, the Franklin County State Airport. And here we sit today.
Okay, but once we set the precedent, then it's going to be very hard to say to the other 9, no. And these are private developers, right?
In most cases, they're not. In the majority of the cases, the development that takes care at the airport has some level of the state involvement. So it's mostly expansion of infrastructure at our airports. Under direction of the legislature a few years ago, we've been going through the exercise of doing master permitting at all these airports. And that was the master permitting that was required to do hangar development. So we're underwriting a lot of the environmental clearance. I think we've got a little over $1 million invested right now in just permitting for private hangar development.
One thing, you know, expanding a runway, putting up a hangar. It's another thing to be putting up buildings for a private developers. And I think that
is what they.
what's being asked in this bill. I think Michael.
That's actually what you directed them to do. In S-162, it says that you're supposed to, the agency is encouraged to obtain as swiftly as practicable all permits in the state-owned master airport permit necessary for growth, development, and facility upgrades at each state-owned airport.
So they got a permit for each of these at each, or they're in the process for each airport?
That's, I don't know the status, but that's what they were directed to do as soon as practicable.
So were we, so well.
This is the bill that Senator Pearson's heard me complain about this, but this is the bill that started. It was 2019. It was my first session. It was the remote worker bill that we sent over to the House, and the House sent it back to us with this airport requirement to do master permitting at the airports. And your committee took out most of it, but left in this part of it. And it came to the floor, and I asked a question on the floor about it because I was very concerned because of the airport in Middlebury, and it's very close to residential areas, and I did not want expansion into near a residential area. And I ended up voting no. It went through. I remember asking a question. There was some also language about electric clean chargers in it,
right.
And Senator Pearson was, interested in that. But it also, the Agency of Transportation is insisting that we told them to build hangars because the House had language about building hangars in this bill. The bill itself, as it passed, does not even mention hangars, but the Agency of Transportation is insisting that that was the legislative intent, was to build hangars. The hangars that they build are built using the master permitting from the state government master permit, but those hangars are then leased to private businesses and private people, and they are rented out and leased at sub-market rates. This is what I've heard from Michelle Boomhauer. I see you shaking your head, but Michelle was at a public meeting, and this is how she described it. They're sub-market rates for that are set at the state level. And
okay, let's let Trini respond.
Okay, so the state doesn't build these hangars, first off. We did the master permitting and the private individual builds the hangar. And sometimes they'll be used for their own aircraft and sometimes they'll be used for a business. They might have a mechanic business in there. They may have aircraft painting. There could be a whole variety of uses to these hangars. And so what we have done is identified on each airport development that we believe will realistically take place in a 5-year period of time. And that's what's included in the master permitting. In most cases, it is hangar development because that's the development that's going to take place. The federal law, the circulars for setting rates at airports require us to have one rate for aviation use. And aviation use is defined as something that requires access to a runway. And then they require us to have a fair market rate for non-aviation use. The aviation use, they're very specific about what costs we can take into consideration and how we kind of calculate that. We can come up with our own formula, but there's criteria that we have to meet for that. They are below fair market rate, and the federal government requires that because of the amount of money they put into it. So the majority of the capital improvements we do on airports are 90% federally funded. And so we do have rates that are set one way for aviation use, and then we do a fair market appraisal calculation for non-businesses that locate their restaurants, even a lot of the other, if you're just machining parts that might go into an aircraft, for example, you're not an aviation use. So their rates are fair market.
All right, Senator Pearson.
Michael, we're getting a little off, but this is obviously rooted in some of the discussion. Can you help me understand what a master permit is? And is that, my understanding is it's sort of one permit that is kind of like a normal permit process, but then you could stretch it out, the development over many years. But it's not like we pass the law and then they just go put up buildings, right?
No, they have to go through the permitting process. They have to go through Act 250. And they have to get all the necessary permits under Act 250 as part of the proposed future development, right? Because you don't necessarily know the specific development, but you do know that the development's going to need wastewater, it's going to need water, it's going to, so you need the Act 250 permit and you need all the underlying permits that you need for that permit for development.
So did we make it a lot easier a few years ago, or that's where I've been confused.
I don't think it's easier, it's just that you directed them to do it and to do it for every airport. So they may not have done it for some of these airports, but now they've done it and that is attractive to businesses.
Thank you.
And the rates are set by the federal government in return for their financing 90% of it. So it's not like the Department of Transportation is using state money and then renting it out to their friends at below market rate.
Right. I'm not the airport guy. Anthony is the airport person. And there are so many overlapping requirements, FAA and other federal requirements at airports that it's daunting. And so if you want to talk the provisions for airports, I would recommend you get Anthony.
I don't know that we want to.
No,
Can I just clarify the master permit that we did? Would that help?
Could we focus on Franklin?
Sure.
That would be helpful.
So what we submitted was a site plan, basically, that showed some expansion on it for hangars. We have a general size that we chose and locations, and we went through the permitting process for that, knowing that it wasn't going to be the final permit, but we had a rough idea. So if you came to us today and said, hey, I want to build a hangar, you pick one of the sites in that proximity, finalize what size you want, and it's just a lot quicker for the developer and less expensive because we've already addressed the stormwater, we've already addressed a lot of the like archaeology, soil borings, all those things have already been done. And so your process when you get to Act 250 is really just kind of finalizing the permit for that site specific.
Okay. Senator McDonald.
So, we understand that federal regulations say you can't grow hay or corn on the land next to airport runways, but it's okay to build buildings, and that's what you're working with?
Yes, so corn and certain crops attract wildlife and birds, and they don't do too well when you put them around airplanes.
Hey, that
Buildings
makes sense.
have height restrictions, so from the runway out, as you get further away from the runway, the higher you can build structures. So when we look at placement of facilities, it's all outside of that safety area. That's why we have to have taxiways for them to get to the runway.
Yep, having worked at airports quite a bit, that makes sense. So the other question I had has to do with being on natural resources, where when you take prime agricultural land to develop it, and the land becomes consumed and unusable as prime agricultural land, there's a fee that's collected to mitigate and acquire agricultural land elsewhere. And that takes place when there's an Act 250 application. Does this bill seek to waive that condition?
This language does,
Yes.
but elsewhere in the building, people are saying, no, we don't need to waive it. We'll just pay for it. It's who owns the Franklin Airport? You guys?
Correct. The state does.
The state owns it, and here we're just making it clear because that we would pay for it ourselves, so the fund doesn't get hurt. You're not setting a precedent of exempting one airport from this. People don't like that we're funding, but we're funding it one way or another, and so this is a direct appropriation, has been, as I understand, something that House and Senate appropriations leaders have agreed to.
So when an Act 250 permit permits the construction on prime agricultural land, money is collected, and
Yes.
that money is sent to preserve and
Conservation.
occupy agricultural land, whether it's an airport or a movie theater or a bowling alley or
Yes,
Whatever.
whatever.
correct.
Okay, and so this airport's being treated with Act 250 just like anyone else under Act 250?
I believe so.
Thank you, Trini. Good to see you.
Good
Thank
to
you.
see you too, Senator.
So, Madam Chair, so if what Senator Pearson is saying is true, and I've heard this from others as well, that it's taken care of, quote unquote, elsewhere in the budget, then can we just remove this language from this bill so that there's no question about setting this precedent of exempting airports from fees?
Michael, I gather that would be,
Yes, and yes. That would be very easy for me to drive.
just.
That's the only amendment we had, right?
That's the only note I got.
Okay, and it. Status. Right now, this is an amendment that Ag put on. Okay, so our amendment would be to strike that amendment.
Right, you would amend the report of the Committee on Agriculture by striking section, what is it, 7A?
Section 12.
12. Then whatever,
Whatever.
whichever section it is.
Section 12, and then you would have to change the effective dates.
Okay, so if you can get that to us.
Yeah, it is section 12.
We can vote it out tomorrow,
Okay,
or Monday. Okay? All right.
okay,
Yeah.
Are there other bills that we-
Yeah,
yeah.
uh-huh. We are now going on, and thank you, Trini, for joining us.
You're welcome.
We're going on to 446. I believe is a new one for us.
Yes, you've not seen this before.
Trini was one of my former students.
So wasn't her daughter, she was also my former hairdresser. She was very glad she retired before she had the class. She said, "Be terrified."
Madam Chair, I've got a lead.
Yes, you did.
Will you, let me know what this is that it comes study, like you had some
Okay.
thoughts of changes, so.
Okay,
I'll leave that with you, okay?
yeah,
Get to it.
I'll have, done.
No, I'm just to drop to me.
Okay, yeah, no, I've got to, I'll talk to Jamie, get some exact wording. Because I know that's her concern. Okay,
So H446 is a miscellaneous natural resources and development subjects bill. It has multiple fairly technical tweaks to
yes,
to A&R subject matter. One of which is really a clarified fee. It's not an increased fee, it's a clarified fee. But then Senate Natural Resources also added to 446 H501, which is a program, a bill about establishing standards for the management of food residuals through the packaging facilities. What is in H501 doesn't have any revenue in it. The only revenue really is the change in the fee, and it's really not a, it's really just a clarification, a simplification of the fee.
where is that?
The fee, it is on,
I'm still reading backwards.
sorry, it's in previously 2822 GA. I have to get my section out to find it.
Yeah, I'm on section 20.
Oh, here it is. It's on page 22 of the bill as passed by the House.
Wait, what? It's 446,
Yeah.
as recommended by Natural Resources.
You need to see it as passed by the House because
Okay.
natural resources.
Okay, that's the amendments, that's.
You
what
don't
they-
have that one on our website.
Yeah,
as passed by the
As
House.
passed by the House is on the website, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah,
Is
right.
it?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, 46.
Wait, what? Is
Maybe
it-
you might have to refresh. because-
I have refreshed a couple times.
Right.
It's. Oh, Mike O'Grady, oh, you know what? You're on here twice. There are two Mike O'Grady's listed, so. As passed by the House is on one Mike O'Grady and the amendment is on the other Mike O'Grady.
There it is. But that's what refresh did, it just appeared at the top.
It made two mics.
Okay, so it's on page
22.
22.
So at the bottom of page 22, the current fee for the pumping of septage from a tank is $10 per 1,000 gallons based on the rated capacity of the tank. And so that has been confusing people. And so it's being amended to 1 cent per gallon, which is effectively the same.
$10 for 1,000 gallons of mix.
That's
Yeah, decimal point.
Yeah. Slide the dot, and there we are.
Yeah, so that's
About 10
when
cents
you
per hundred.
call the guy from Plainfield, he comes out and pumps your septic tank.
Mhm.
And why was $10 per 1,000 gallons? Oh, because if you did 340 gallons, it required math.
It requires. And now,
Now I'll just have to do it by 0.01.
Should we explain how we got rid of equalized pupils again?
so
That's
that's,
my calculator.
that is the change, the revenue change in this bill.
Wow.
Okay. And it's the same cost per gallon and it all depend on how many gallons get pumped. And I thought my daughter was getting a really good deal because the city of Montpelier pumped her septic tank.
Wow.
I have a feeling that she's paying more in readiness fees than they're paying in pumping.
This is a really long miscellaneous bill, Chris. Good job.
Yeah.
This is a
Can
big
I ask
mystery.
a question, which I don't really want to ask, but I feel like diligence requires it. So for Mr. O'Grady, could this also result in some savings? For instance, the other one rounded, the units were thousands of gallons, right? So if you had 500 gallons in your tank, would you have been charged $10 under the old system? And now you'd only be charged $5 if you're pumping 500 out?
Because they were interpreting as up to 1,000.
I don't know. That's a good question. I can check with Matt Chapman on that. But I was under the impression it was because people had to do the math.
Right.
Didn't.
Right.
Math, you gotta divide and then multiply.
Well, I figure it's a
I'm
modest
not gonna try.
modest change, but I would want to know because the other one rounds to the nearest thousand. And then I don't know what happens if you're at 1,200. Are you doing 2 times 10 or are you 10 plus another $2?
Okay, Senator. Can
I
you
love-
find that answer out offline? Because I don't know if it's really relevant to this committee's jurisdiction. The floor is yours, Senator. You have to raise your hand.
Okay, so I would move to report favorably H446.
I have 1, 2, 3, 4 of us. So we up, and there's Senator Pearson, and I can see him. But I think he's driving his car, so we're gonna make this very fast. I have 5 of us now. And I have a motion to report favorably because it is just changing the math, not the fee. On H446. So, further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. I see that as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6, 0, 1. And Senator Bray, would you report that?
Sure. Dovetail nicely with the other report that will come right before it.
Just make sure you figure out that math question beforehand.
I don't know.
I'm gonna ask you on the floor.
I'm not an analyst. I've never represented myself to be one.
Analyst or an analyst?
Analyst. Oh, ouch.
All right, committee, I'm trying to get you out of here before this thing really turns into bedlam. The other one we have on is H697, that's the forest land for enrollment and use value. I think some of us we found out that there's fees that if you do take it out, you pay
The land use change.
land use change tax. 1, 2, I'm hoping Senator Pearson pops up. I've got 4, Senator Bray. Yep, there's Pearson. He's now wearing sunglasses.
Wait, 697, that's the one we're doing?
This is putting the reserve forest land, the old growth with the new category. Senator
So-
Bray.
Madam Chair, I would move that the committee vote out favorably H 697 as amended by Senate Natural Resources and Energy.
All right, Senator Bray has moved that we report out favorably H 697, as it was brought to us by the Committee on Natural Resources. We've got it as it was amended. Further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Senator Pearson has gone.
Aye.
Aye, all right. All right, so I've got that as 5-0-2. And Senator Bray, would you like to report that one too?
Sure. I feel like I'll be pretty familiar with the bill by then.
I think you're the best one to answer questions. Okay, Michael, I think that's it for you. We are waiting to see.
The 4-4 is, no, not the 4-4, it's
Madam,
Yes,
709.
Madam Chair, did you record my vote for that one?
we got it recorded.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Senator Sorokin is back. I'm waiting to see if we have the yield bill ready. Hey,
Senator Cummings, you have both the yield bill in email and you also have the PCB testing reserve funds from Senate Ed. I haven't posted either of them yet. I just don't know how you want to proceed.
I don't either. Let me go back and see what I've got.
Senator Brock is still in the ceremony.
I'm sure he is.
And, I've written my conflict saying I'd be a few minutes late, so I do want to.
I'm trying to get this one out.
So this.
Okay, we have emails. This is
Shall I post them, Senator?
post Abby's. I'm not sure what Senate Ed, if we may not, that's Elizabeth St. James.
It's just language about PCB remediation. It doesn't have the right numbers. in
Yeah, it doesn't have the right numbers in it.
Okay.
But we could probably use the language and just update the numbers maybe, or.
Is Abby around?
I can get Abby. She's not scheduled to come to you till 5:30. Do you want some time to look at it and take a break, or do you want me to get Abby?
Michael's trying to get to a committee conference, but Randy's still tied up. I think I want to have Abby look at the proposal from Elizabeth St. James, and we need to change the numbers in there.
I apologize. What would you like me to do with Elizabeth St. James document?
Send it to Abby, and we need to update the numbers, because these are not the numbers we agreed on.
And did we want to make it more general, or do you want to just stick with the PCBs? More kind of broad facilities with a priority to PCBs.
I don't know how we would try to efforts. And other toxic substance response.
Do you want to stay on live, Senator Cummings?
Well, we're still trying to get committee in here. Yeah, why don't you email this over to Abby?
I just did.
We go on break until 5:30. Let her
Okay.
take a look at this and let us get the right numbers in. And we can ask her if she can broaden this PCB to, or other. I don't know how you weight the other toxic.
Or just emergency financial or
That gets
facility,
pretty,
yeah. I guess maybe we wanted.
I think, yeah, let's just leave it at this. If we find another, we can come up and say you can use it for this too. Okay, yeah, just have her get the right